Chapter 4 Early Childhood Cognitive Development. So, in this section, we're going to discuss an overview of cognitive development, the cognitive milestones in early childhood, Piaget's theory and the pre-operational stage, information processing, other cognitive development theories, and language development. So, an overview of cognitive development. Cognitive development is the processes such as perceptual thinking, reasoning, and problem solving by which one comes to know and understand the world. So let's look at some of the milestones in early childhood. So cognitive skills at this age, by 12 to 15 months, they should have a 3 to 5 word vocabulary. They use gestures to communicate. They vocalize, especially they replace crying with saying something. They understand the word no. They have a sense of me and mine, and they can imitate what they see parents doing, especially around the house. By 15 to 18 months, they have a vocabulary of about 10 words, and they use words with gestures. So, like give me, they may use their hands or put their hands out and open and close it. They can begin to point to body parts, especially if they're taught songs like head, shoulders, knees, and toes. They vocalize no when they don't like something. They can point to common objects, so they have one-to-one correspondence with words and pictures. They know that something is complete, such as waving bye-bye or closing something up. They know where things are and where they belong. They have more claiming of mine, so they understand what is mine and what is someone else's. They begin to distinct from you and me, but they're still not able to perceive others as individuals. They're resistant to change. Their autonomy is expressed in defiance. So when they want to do something, they may pout or cross their arms and say no. And words are not important discipline techniques. So during this time, saying something to them isn't necessarily the best discipline technique, but letting them go back and fix it is more important. So talking and action are very important. At 18 to 24 months, they have an increase in vocabulary, but it is mostly nouns, so people, place, things. They can point to more body parts. They can combine 2 or 3 words. They can name pictures, so they still have one-to-one correspondence. They can follow simple directions, but it needs to be one direction at a time. They can match colors, and they use color name, but they may use color names randomly, but they can match colors. They can use number words, but it may be random. They can ask for things such as food or drink. They can understand and ask for another or for more. They like to mimic things with their play. They're very self-centered, so they're still very egocentric, but they're starting to distinguish between their self and other people. By 2 years old, they learn how to avoid simple hazards. So they're a little bit more cautious, primarily based off of the experiences that they may have gotten hurt. Their vocabulary by 30 months, it reaches around 300 words, which is a big jump from 3 to 5, 10, and then just an increase. Now they have a lot more words and they're able to communicate. They still have one-to-one correspondence. They can identify in terms of names, gender, and place. They use I when referring to their self. They have phrases of 3 to 4 sentences, 3 to 4 word sentences. So they're starting to build sentences instead of just saying one. Their vocabulary by 36 months reaches around 1,000 words, and verbs and adjectives start to be in that. They understand concepts like big and little, and they have interest in learning. So they'll ask questions like, what is that? Or they're coming up to that why stage. Why do we have to do this? By 3 years old, they can count. They can tell by holding up their fingers. So they have correspondence of I'm 3. This is 3 with my fingers. They can tell first and last name. They can answer simple questions. They can repeat 3 or 4 digits or nonsense syllables. Their readiness to conform to spoken words. So they're really starting to talk and communicate with others. They can understand taking turns. They use language to resist. So they're really going to vocalize that they do or do not want to do something. They can bargain with peers, so they're starting to communicate back and forth. They understand things like long versus short. And by the end of the third year, their vocabulary is 1,500 words. So there's a giant increase in their words. But again, all of this depends on if they're spoken to, if they're read to, how much are they involved with language and written word, spoken word, anything. And then 4 to 5 year olds, by the end of the fifth year, vocabulary is over 2,000 words, including adverbs and prepositions. They understand opposites. They understand consecutive conceptions like big, bigger, best, or big, bigger, biggest. Lots of questions about why and how. They can correctly count 5 to 10 objects. They can correctly identify colors. They may argue with requests. They have a good imagination. They're dramatic. They like to be silly with rhymes and sounds. And they're beginning to understand time in regard to things like yesterday or tomorrow. But they may have trouble understanding next year or in a month or 3 months. That's a little bit hard for them. And they can elaborate to answers to questions. So they're becoming very verbal and being able to communicate. So Piaget's cognitive development theory. So Piaget's theory explains how people think and understand. And he talks about schemas, which is the knowledge of representation in the mind, and how we assimilate by taking information and adding it to our schemas, or accommodate by changing what we thought we knew with the new information. And equilibration is that balance between knowing what we know and adding to it, or changing what we thought we knew. And Piaget says that there are 4 stages of cognitive development. And at this age, they're in what is known as pre-operational. So they use things like symbolic thinking, they're using language, and they're egocentric. Their imagination and experiences grow, and the child decenters. And we're going to talk a lot about what all of these things are in this section. So pre-operational stage. Well, pre-operational stage is when children have pre-operational thought, which is intertwined with language, perceptions, and brain development. The pre refers to the fact that thinking is pre-logical. They're not able to think logically or abstractly yet. They're basing their understanding of things based on mental imagery, what they think and what they've encountered, and intuition. So they're very intuitive, and they use that to make decisions. So intuition is the ability to acquire knowledge without proof, evidence, or reasoning. So for instance, if we go back to that example of the chicken pox and catching the chicken pox from a space shuttle that went to the moon, there's no evidence of that, but that's how they think, or maybe that's because that's how they were told. So in pre-operational, there's 2 stages. There's symbolic function, which is from 2 to 4, and then intuitive thought, which is ages 4 to 7. So characteristics of pre-operational thought: appearance and reality, egocentrism, centering, irreversibility, lack of conservation, classification, animatism, pre-causal thinking, or transductive reasoning. And we're going to talk about what each of these are in just a moment. So appearance and reality. Now, this is defined reality is almost exclusive to what they can see. So the appearance and the reality is based off of what they can see through their eyes. And their thought is bound by their perception. So they're very egocentric, which means that they think that whatever they see, everybody else can see. And what they know, everybody else should know. So there's almost no ability to generalize beyond obvious or the information at hand. So their judgments, their decisions, and their conclusions are based on what is seen. And if it's not seen, then it doesn't exist. And this is primarily because they lack what is known as theory of mind. And theory of mind is the ability to understand that others may feel, think, and process things differently than they do. And children at this stage are very egocentric. So, for instance, let's look at this picture right here, Sally and Anne. Well, Sally put the ball in this brown box, and then Sally left. Well, Anne took the ball from the brown box and put it in the green box. Where do you think Sally would look for the ball? Well, to them, Sally would look for the ball in the last place she put it. However, Anne moved it. But if Sally didn't know Anne moved it, she's going to look where she last found it. However, when you tell children that Anne moved the ball, they're going to think that Sally knows that Anne moved the ball, but Anne wasn't there because they think that what they know, that Sally should know. Here are some videos to help you with this that show you a lot of really good examples of what this looks like and children's expectations and their reasoning behind this thought. So egocentrism is a trait that limits a child's understanding of the world to their own perception. So again, the child is the center, and what they think and what they see and what they believe that's the same for everyone. Now, by the end of early childhood, they gain theory of mind, which they realize that people are different. But at the beginning, especially in early childhood, they think that whatever they see, they feel, and they think is the same for everyone. And the test that they do this on is called the 3 mountains test. And they put a doll on one side, or a person could be there too, and they ask the child, what did they see on this side? And then they ask, well, what can the doll or what can the person see from where they are? And they list everything that they can see because they think that what they see, everybody can see. And what they think, everyone can think. And what they feel, everyone can feel. So centering. Centering is a trait that limits information processing to only one aspect or characteristic rather than more than one thing. So at this age, early childhood children can only focus on one thing at a time. Now, as they get older, they can start focusing on 2 and 3. They struggle with multitasking or multiple steps and directions. They need one thing at a time. So some examples of centering would be conservation tasks. So number is one thing that a lot of children can do at the beginning. So the original presentation would ask them, are there the same number of pennies in each row? Well, a child having number sense, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute too, would count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They're the same. However, when they take the pennies and expand one row to make it longer and another row to be shorter, and then they ask, now are there the same number of pennies in each row, or does one row have more? They would say this one has more. And when asked, they would say, because it's longer. However, longer wasn't the question, but they can't understand that just because something's longer doesn't mean that it has more in it. So if they count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, they would see that it has the same number, but they can't take those two aspects simultaneously. They can only do one or the other. So in kindergarten, they do a lot of things with shapes and sizes, and they have them sort all the triangles. So they may have trouble with the triangles being a different color, or with triangles being a different size or in a different orientation. So one's going up and one's going to the right and one's going down. They may have trouble with that at the beginning because of centering. And this could also be done through mass, liquid, and weight. So, for instance, the clay ball is the same amount, and then they would squish one. And it says which one has more. Well, they would say this one because this one's flat. Same thing with the water. Same amount of water, but when they pour one of the glasses into a wider container, which one has more, they're going to automatically say the taller one because they have trouble depicting and picking out different aspects and what the question or what's really being asked. Same thing with weight. Does each of the two balls of clay weigh the same? Yes. Then they would take it off and smush one. Does it have the same weight now? Well, a child would say no. Or which one weighs more? This one, because this one's flat. They cannot comprehend too many aspects at one time, but as they get older, they can. So irreversibility is the inability of young children to comprehend that some processes and operations can be reversed in sequence. So for instance, the clay. Well, the two clay balls, one ball and one ball, they'll say that they're the same. But when one's flattened, they don't understand that just because it's flattened, that it can't be rolled back. So once it is crushed or flat, it can be rolled back into the shape of a ball again. And the child knows this without having seen the operation performed. But at little ages, they may not quite understand that that can be reversed. They'll think once it's flat, and they just move on to the next thing. And when they're in school, things like math and checking your work, so 3 plus 2 is 5. And then some of us said, well, make sure you check your work, and then you would subtract it. 5 minus 3 is 2. They don't understand that that can happen. They think they can only go in one direction at a time, and they can only understand one aspect at a time. So no multi-step problems and things like that. Not at this age. So they also lack conservation. And conservation, or lack of conservation, is the inability to understand that the essential characteristics of something are preserved even though it's rearranged in different ways. And oftentimes it's like they're tricked because they think something looks bigger than it actually is. So if we go back to the number where they had the 6 pennies and then they moved it apart, the child would say the longer one, even though they both had 6. Same thing with the liquids. Same glass, one was just poured into a taller glass, and they automatically think the taller one is bigger because it's taller. And a lot of this comes into packaging displays for children. A lot of us, if you ever take a small child, or maybe we even still do it too, looking at the size of the packaging doesn't necessarily mean that there's more candy in the package. So just because it's a big box doesn't mean that it has more candy in it. So the Reese's Pieces might actually have more in it because they're smaller. Even though the box is smaller, a child may grab the bigger box because of that. So classification is the ability to group objects according to traits of similarity or likeness. Now, centering and egocentrism account for their inflexibility of being able to group things according to a shared likeness. So there's certain things that they can do and certain things that they can't do, but it has to be in regard to one aspect. So for instance, he's sorting by color. So he has big colors and small colors, but if it was sort all the red triangles and then there was red circles too, that would be a little bit too much. So red and shape, just one aspect at a time. So this little boy here is sorting dogs, birds, and cats. But as he gets older, he may have to sort them into different breeds or different types of animals because there's different classifications, but right now it's just one thing at a time. For her, she's sorting all the objects into shapes. So all the triangles, all the squares, and all the circles. Hers are different sizes though. But if they had an activity where she had to sort the shapes into different size categories or by different colors, that would be more difficult for her to do. So, animism is the belief of young children that all things, including objects, are alive. And this can occur during solitary and symbolic play. It's categorized by talking and taking care of objects and believing that things fall because things can move. So at this age, they're very imaginative with what they're doing. So things like pretending that you're a doctor and taking care of a bear, or role playing that your figures are battling or having a tea party. It's because they believe that these objects are alive. And they'll say things like, well, I have to cover my teddy bear up because he or she will get cold at night. Or if an object falls off of a shelf, it's because the object didn't want to be there. So pre-causal thinking and transductive reasoning. So pre-causal thinking is a type of logic unique to young children, and it's based on intuition rather than fact. So children believe that there is a reason for everything. And because of that, they confuse reality and fantasy. So they may have nightmares and they may have issues with movies and thinking that it's real, or getting emotionally attached to a character or to a toy because they confuse reality and fantasy. Now, due to this, children may jump to conclusions and make deductions based on what they observe. So they begin to develop cause and effect relationships and scripts. So when blank happens, blank happens. Therefore, when blank has been observed, blank will follow. However, these cause and effect relationships can be right or wrong. So when mommy is reading the newspaper, I have to go take a bath. Well, if it's in the morning and she's reading the newspaper, the child might think automatically that they need to go take a bath when they took a bath last night, and they may get confused because certain things can happen at different times. So transductive reasoning is seeing a relationship between two objects or events when there's not a relationship. And it just causes some issues with their ability to understand what's going on, but they're trying. They're trying. Now, scripts, on the other hand, these are things that children do for memory. So things like bedtime routine, bath time routine, homework routine, getting dressed in the morning routines. Those are things that help them to remember things. So they're using these pre-causal thinking to be able to form these scripts, but they may not understand why or that certain things can happen at different times. So revising Piaget's findings. Well, he believed that children were very egocentric. However, it has been found that they're not as egocentric as originally thought. Experience and talking and things like that really help children to understand that other people have feelings and emotions and different thoughts than themselves. And experience can also help children with complex classification problems. So if they're given guidance and scaffold and support, like Vygotsky says, from a more knowledgeable other, then they're capable of doing things that Piaget said they should not be able to do at that age. So we're going to stop and we're going to process what we have covered so far in regard to Piaget. So go back and review the material as needed to answer these questions. So information processing during early childhood. So information processing is that computer model where we take incoming information and we put it in our sensory memory, our short-term memory, and we either forget it or we put it in our working memory where we rehearse it, and we either store it in long-term memory or we forget it. And anything that's put into long-term memory is either retrieved to help us with our working memory to apply something and make those connections, or it's changed and sent back. It's accommodated and changed. So, during early childhood, there are some changes in information processing in regards to attention, memory, and metacognition. And we're going to talk about each of those in just a second. So, attention. So, attention is selective, it involves construction, and it has limited capacity. Now, in early childhood, children do not understand that attention is selective, that you have to pay attention to be able to learn new things or to be able to do new things. They assume that adults can attend and process information in any vicinity, and that to regulate attention, so they don't understand that adults have to really pay attention to know what's going on. They think it just kind of absorbs in. However, to regulate attention, children must focus on relevant information and control their impulsive response to distractions. So, attention is paying attention. And when you pay attention, then you can retain it so that you can remember what the model did. However, if you don't pay attention, you can't really remember what the model did, so you can't really imitate what the model did. But again, you also have to be able to reproduce it. So people have to have the capacity for doing it. So even if you retained what they did, if you're not capable of doing that skill, it's not going to help. But if you don't pay attention, then you're not going to have any of that. But you also have to have motivation. So people must be motivated to imitate the behavior. They have to be motivated to replicate it. Now, for young children, motivation and attention do go hand in hand. So, doing a lot of things like Skinner talks about conditioning, rewarding, and praising. Oh, I really like how so and so is paying attention. Gets others to pay attention. So, why are they getting praised? Or why are they getting to go to the treasure box? Or whatever that may be. So, finding those things, because children don't realize that they have to be very selective with what they pay attention to, and they get easily distracted. So there's four aspects of attention that Fauvel describes. So controlling attention, fitting their attention to the task, planning on how to direct it, and then monitoring their attention. So some things that schools do is they'll do tracking. So the student is sitting upright, they're tracking, their eyes are in a certain way, and they're raising their hand and asking questions. There's a lot of different parts to that. So, memory is the ability to process information received from external factors. And memory skills do improve during early childhood due to brain maturation and the increased efficiency of the cerebral cortex in storing this information. Now, improvements in the memory strategies they use as well. And two strategies that they use the most are classification and categorizing and rehearsal. So, classifying and categorizing skills. This is the ability to use noticeable features, so using their senses still, they still need to be able to see it, to place objects or constructs into distinct groups. So, children can do this by shape, color, word family, or animal types transportation. So, in a lot of younger grades, you'll see things like sorting shapes into different categories or end words where they would take the word jug and then they would paste it under the UG for the word family sound. Same thing by sorting shapes by size, small, medium, large. But it's a lot of hands-on manipulating of what they can see. Rehearsal is when someone practices something over and over and over again. So naming objects repeatedly may assist in the memory process. So rehearsal is when information is able to remain longer in short-term memory, and it's the repetition of entering it into short-term memory. However, rehearsal has to transfer information into long-term memory. However, they have to have a purpose for it. They have to understand why it's going to be useful, or they're just going to forget it. And it's all about how often they have to bring it back up from rehearsal to use it and to change their schemas and to add on to it. So, emerging academic skills. So, children learn from all contexts. They learn from home, daycare, educational programming, everything. And culture plays a huge factor in what is emphasized and valued. So, going back to Brofenbrenner here, the child's in the middle. They have the time, which is the chrono system, and then they have all these systems pushing upon who they are. And they learn all sorts of things from all of these different environments, their mesosystem, their microsystem, they learn from, and their exosystem. They learn from all of those. So, something that is very prominent in their learning during early childhood is their early mathematics skills. And mathematical skills are based on experience, practice, and exposure. All learning is based off of that. How much experience, how much practice, and have they even seen it before? Now, examples of common early mathematics skills that children need to be exposed, experience, and practice are rote counting, conceptual counting, solving problems using groups, counting, and manipulatives. Now, these are very, very important skills because as you can see here, children have to have these lower level conceptual understandings of things so that when they get to the higher grades, they can add on to what it is. But if they don't have the foundation of counting, they can't do operations. If you can't count and you don't know your numbers, you can't count. And if you can't identify your numbers, you're never going to be able to do adding and subtracting and multiplying and dividing. And if you don't know your shapes, you're going to have a lot of trouble in geometry. So all of these things build upon each other. And it's very important for them to have a very strong foundation, a conceptual understanding of what these things are so they can add on to them. So rote counting. Around the age of 2, children learn number words and use them to count. This is typically learned through songs, poems, or stories. So things like 5 Little Ducks or 5 Little Monkeys Jumping on the Bed, the ants go marching one, all those that we learned when we were little. Now, rote counting is the process of saying the number words, but not knowing what the numbers mean or represent. So example, 1, 2, buckle my shoe. Well, what's 1, 2 really mean? 3, 4, shut the door? They don't understand what 1, 2, 3, 4 means. They're just singing a song, which means they have a rote memorization. So the primary goal of rote counting is learning the number names and also learning the stable order. So number names have to be said in the same order every time. 1, 2, 3, 4, not 1, 3, 4, 2. So they help with learning the words, but really understanding what 1 means or 2 means. Rote counting doesn't do that. So these songs are good, but it doesn't really help them to understand what numbers represent and mean. Conceptual counting. So by the age of 4, children can count with conceptual understanding. And this means that they are assigning a number to an object or representing a number with objects. So when you say 1, they may hold up 1 finger. Or when you say show me 5, they'll hold up 5 fingers. Or they may have dots or counter bears or something. And they'll put 1 out or put 2 out. Now, for conceptual counting, children may use fingers, manipulatives, pictures, dots, etc. to count. And there's a lot of goals for conceptual counting. So they learn how to count. So they learn something known as one-to-one correspondence, which means that each thing is assigned a number and only one number. So for instance, 1 butterfly, 2 butterfly, 3 butterfly, 4 butterfly, 5 butterfly, 6 butterflies, 7 butterfly, 8 butterflies. There are 8 butterflies. So they understand that numbers represent things. They also practice stable order. So they count 1, 2, 3, 4, not 1, 3, 4, 2. They also work on counting up, which is where they start to count up or down from a given number. So for instance, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5, 6, 7, 8. So they can say 7, what comes after 7? 8. And then they also learn cardinality. And that's the last number said is the cardinal value of the things counted. So for instance, 1, 2, 2 what? 2 books. Because numbers represent objects, they represent something. They also learn what to count. So they learn the abstraction principle, which is which way to count. So in counting, typically you can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You can count from left to right, you can count from right to left, you can count up to down and down to up. But traditionally in school, we do everything from left to right. But that is because that is the way we learn to read. We read from left to right, from top to bottom. However, some children, especially if they come from another country, depending on how their orientation is, they may read from top to bottom, or from bottom to top, or from right to left. So it may be harder because of that. So traditionally, we teach them how to count from left to right and top to bottom because that just further instills their reading. And then also order irrelevance principle. Count items in any order. So abstraction is which way to count, and then order irrelevance. They can count items in any order, but again, we really focus on that left to right and top to bottom in America because that's how they read, and it just further gives them further practice and skill with that. So solving problems using groups, counting, and manipulatives. Well, at this age, they use counting as a strategy to answer questions, such as which group has more or less objects, adding or subtracting objects in relation to groups, or solving division problems using a consecutive or overlapping strategy. So a consecutive strategy is role-playing the problem. And that would be an example here where it says, in the ocean, there are 6 sea turtles, There are 6 scuba divers, and 6 clownfish. How many things are in the ocean altogether? And then all they would do is count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Now, at this age, they would have to do that, whereas we would say 6, 12, 18, because we can count by sixes, and we know that 6 times 3 is 18 because we've already learned multiplication. However, they have not. Now, an overlapping strategy would be drawing it out by making groups and then distributing objects of groups into other groups to solve it. So that would be an example here with 16 divided by 4. So Zach has 16 caterpillars and he wants to put 4 caterpillars in each butterfly cage. How many cages will he need? Well, he would start and he would put 1 in each of these. So he would say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So he would go to each of the groups and place 1 thing until he ran out of blocks or caterpillars, and then he would say there are 1, 2, 3, 4 cages. But he needs to conceptually draw it out and understand it. And this is because if we go back to Bruner for just a minute, there's 3 learning modes. And so we have inactive, iconic, and symbolic. So in inactive, this is where children really have to have objects to understand what they're doing. So for instance, this would be an example of an inactive problem because they're using the cubes, the linking cubes, to solve the problem. And they're not using any abstract symbols. They're not saying 6 plus 6 plus 6 necessarily here, but they have it down here at the bottom to help them get to the symbolic example. Now, something the teacher could have done is instead of them using the blocks, she could have drawn sea turtles and had them count the sea turtles and then put it down, count this one and then put it down, and then count the next one and put it down. And that would be more of an example of an iconic example. So this is more iconic in nature because they were just using pictures instead of using a manipulative. And then symbolic is just the abstract algorithm 3 plus 3, 6. 6 plus 6 plus 6, 18. 16 divided by 4, 4. So abstract understanding of numerals and symbols are still developing. So they need manipulatives and other iconic tools to solve problems. They need to be able to use all their resources because they don't come into the world knowing that this is 3 and that this is a plus. A lot of them will say, what's this 3T3 mean? Because this looks like a T, but it also looks like a cross, but it's also a plus. So they have to understand what all of these things are. So by using things like manipulatives and understanding number sense really helps them to be able to do more problems like this. So early language arts skills. So just like math, there are foundational skills that are needed for children to be successful. So in society, a child must learn to read and write. And to be successful, children must learn that strange shapes and lines mean something, learn how to form these shapes and lines to convey meaning, learn that letters represent sounds, and learn that writing is a way of expressing oneself. So they have to have all of these things. They have to have print motivation and vocabulary and print awareness, letter knowledge, narrative skills, and phonological awareness. So let's talk about what emergent literacy is. So emergent literacy is the first step in becoming a reader and a writer. It is not teaching them how to read and how to write. It focuses on exposure to books, letter names, words, concepts of prints, oral language, letter sounds, etc. It's looking at a picture book and finding a picture of a cat and reading the word cat and sounding it out for them, cat, having them do it. And then also having them point to the cat or say, ooh, I see a cat. Do you see a cat? And they point to the cat. Do you see a word that says cat? And they point to it. So it really gives an understanding, but it's also being able to hold a book and knowing how to hold it correctly, not upside down. How do I start? What's the cover? What's the spine? Who's the author? Who's the illustrator? What's a word? Show me a letter. Show me a picture. What does this symbol mean? All these foundational things that a lot of us take for granted. So what I want you to do is I want you to watch this video, and it's really going to show you what concept of print is and how children understand what it is that they're reading. So early literacy focuses a lot on phonics, and it can also focus on sight words. Now, phonics is an approach to teaching reading and spelling based upon phonetics, or the sound of letters. So when we were in school, especially in kindergarten and preschool, we probably had something, maybe you had Letterland, and you had Annie Apple. Annie Apple goes, ah, ah, ah. And it's designed to help children use the correspondence between letters and sounds to learn to read and write. So later when they want to spell the word ant, they'll go ant, ah, 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 a, n, n, t. And it helps them to be able to spell, but it also helps them to be able to read the word. So when they see it, they'll go ant. Now, context is also important in helping young readers to code words that are not familiar or words that are not easy to sound out. And this would be things like using pictures, so using picture power, and background knowledge to help read the words. So for instance, they may be able to read this just fine. I see a, and then they'll stop. They'll go, fire truck. And go, not fire truck. Let's look at that first word. and they'll go ladder. But they're using the pictures to help them. And then sight words are high frequency words in a text. So these are any of these. So is, it, in. These are things that we see in text all the time. And they're just words that we need to know as we read. Some words we can sound out. Some words we just see them a lot. So let's look at the sequence of phonological skills. So by age 4, they can rote, imitate, and enjoyment of rhyme and alliteration. So they can do things like rhyming. So cat, hat, sat, bat, gnat. And they like to say things like Sally sells seashells down by the seashore. And they think it's funny, but they're practicing those sounds. By age 5, they can recognize rhymes and they're starting to clap and count syllables. So which 2 words rhyme? Bat, bug, hat. They could circle bat and hat, or they could sort bat and hat. And clapping syllables, so dog, and then turtle. So turtle. And a lot of teachers will teach clapping, or they'll teach you to put your hand under your chin and say it, and however many times your chin hits is your syllable. So dog, your chin should have hit once. Turtle, turtle. It should have hit twice. Now, 5 and a half, they're starting to blend onset and rhyme. And they can produce a rhyme. And these are 2 different rhymes. So this is more of like a blend. So tree, tree. That would be a rhyme. And then rhyming with in sounds. So tell me a word that rhymes with cat, rat. So 2, they're both pronounced the same way, but they have different meanings. So blends and onset and rhyme deal with blends. So boat, oat, oat would be a rhyme. And then producing a rhyme, cat, rat. And then they isolate beginning sounds. So say the first sound in net, and they'll say n, n. They still not quite ready for the it part yet, but it depends on their experience. So 6-year-olds, they have syllable deletion. So say tulip, now say it again, but don't say the tu. So they'll just say lip. Blending of 2 and 3 phoneme words. So sun, un, and then bow, b-o. And then segments of 2 to 3 phoneme words with no blend. So they'll say b-o-t. So say the sounds in the word boat as you move a bead. So they're looking at each individual sound. Whereas with sun, they would just say sun, bow. Together, blending, and then segmenting would be when they're sounding out each individual sound. So b-o-t, b-o-t. Now, 6 and a half, they're segmenting words that have up to 3 or 4 phonemes, including blends. So black, b-l-a-k. And you can even hear that as you're saying it, you're even kind of breaking it down. B-l-a-k. Now, phoneme substitution to build new words with no blends. So they may change the C in cat to make bat. And then they may change the B in bat to make hat. At age 7, they have phoneme deletion, which is the initial and the final word positions. So say seed, and now say it again without the D. So they wouldn't say seed, they would say see. At 8 years, phoneme deletion with the initial position, including blends. So say sled, and now say it again without the S, and they would say led. And then 9 years, they have phoneme deletion with the medial and the final blend position. So say snail, and now say it again without the N, which would be sail. So they're starting to go from individual letter sounds to blends, and then how one word looks similar to another word based off of the initial sound, the end sound, or the middle sound. So, emergent writing. Writing skills are very limited at this age. Most children that are in early childhood, they're in the scribbling, and some of what they write may even be illegible. Writing is a very cognitive and motor skill task. So they may have it in their head, but they don't have the fine motor skills to be able to write it out. So a lot of children may tell their story verbally instead of writing it, but they still need to practice with both of them. So as we can see here, here are some stages of writing and spelling as they go. So the first stage, they just draw randomly, scribble, and there's really no connection to a given topic. But as they get older, they'll draw a picture related to a topic, and they can retell a story about the picture. So a teacher or a parent may read a story to them, and then they say, draw me a picture to tell me what happened in the story. And the child would be able to draw the picture and then tell. The next stage, they would be able to draw a picture about a topic, and they could write using scribble writing, and then they could retell as well. So you may not be able to understand it, but to them it means something. 4, they would draw a picture about a topic. They would write using random letters, and they would have copies. They would copy the environment, the signs, the symbol, etc., from daily life print, and the writes unrelated sight word vocabulary. So they may be able to write A, and it may say AC, and the C would represent cat, or they would just say ACT and leave the A out of the word cat. The 5th stage, they're writes using first and last consonants. So in this stage, they may just put AC to mean a cat, and here they may say ACT. So the beginning sounds may be extended by random strings of letters, and they copy prints from around the room. So they may go and look at sight words or things that they've seen. Stage 6, they use phonetic spelling, including letters to represent most sounds. So I have 5 kittens, or fluffy kitten. And even if you don't understand what that is, they would tell you. Say, tell me, read this to me. I have something kitten. I have a cat named something. I like her. So it gets more detailed. But at the beginning, you may have to ask them to tell you what it says. Now, at stage 7, they use phonetic spelling with most consonants and some vowels, and they begin to use spaces between words, and they write multiple words or phrases about a topic. And then the last one for early stages, they write multiple phrases. So for instance, I have a cat named Midnight. He's all black with yellow eyes. I like him. And you still may not be able to understand all of that, but they can tell you, and you could go and see, I have a black cat named Midnight. He's black with yellow eyes. I like him. So metacognition is another thing that develops during early childhood. And this is knowing how to place information into memory and how to retrieve information. And it's a new skill for them. So it's the ability of being aware of and understanding the changes occurring in one's own processing. So as they learn how to pay attention to things, they start to remember these things later and to be able to apply these things later. But prompting and helping them, what did we learn today? Or tell me something you learned about this. Or I really want you to pay attention to this. It's very, very important at this age to help them tune in and focus. So we're going to stop and we're going to process what we have learned so far in regard to information processing, emergent literacy, emergent writing, and metacognition. So, other cognitive development theories. So, Vygotsky's sociocultural theory. This is a theory that focuses on social interactions and how cognitive development is co constructed through exchanges. So, it is the interaction with the adult and a more knowledgeable other, and the internalization of the interactions. But again, the children have to understand that you have to focus and have selective attention to what is being shown or during the interaction so that it can be applied. And he claims that cultural tools are used in cognitive development. So, language, signs, symbols, mathematics, pencils, everything. And that approximation is when children learn through social exchanges by constructing their own meaning. So, it's an ongoing process of learning from each other so that it can be applied. But it's the social interaction and the language all together at once. So Vygotsky talks about having a zone of proximal development, which is known as the ZPD. And as we talked about with early mathematics and early literacy and writing skills, children have a zone where they can work independently on their own and where they need assistance. So things like phonics and letter sounds and blends and syllables, that would be something that would be in a child's zone of proximal development. But if it's too hard for them, it would be out of reach. So it has to be just right to where a child can be successful. Same thing with their math skills. So a child may know all the number names, but they may need help with conceptual understanding of one is one object, or five, show me five fingers. They may not have an understanding. So working in their zone is very important so that learning through scaffolding and support can happen. So through a more knowledgeable other. And guidance supports their learning. Now, scaffolding is any explanation prompting that promotes understanding. It's modeling. So when talking about number sense, teachers would actually have objects and they would count either with on the board and they would have that picture of 5 books and everybody would count 1 book, 2 book, 3 book, 4 book, 5 books, so that children can understand, and then they would go and practice it on their own to show if they've mastered it so that they can move on to the next skill, or so more scaffolding and support could be given to help them master that skill. So theory of mind is a very important concept at this age. So Piaget claims that children are very egocentric at the beginning and that they think that whatever they think, feel, believe is what everybody else thinks, feels, and believes. However, a theory of mind is the ability to understand your own state as well as the mental state of others. So it refers to understanding that other people don't necessarily think, believe, and see what we do. So it helps children understand that thought and reality are not always the same. And this is done through the classic study of unexpected contents in the box. So for instance, they would show a child a crayon box and they would ask them, what's in the crayon box? And the child looks at them and says, crayons. It's like, oh, well, let's look at what's in the crayon box and open it up. And then it's raisins. And then they're like, there's raisins in that box. And then they'll close it up and they'll ask them, what do you think mommy would believe is in this box? And at first they would say raisins because they just saw raisins and they think that mommy thinks whatever they thought. However, as they get older and they develop theory of mind, they would say mommy would think there's crayons in that box, but there's really raisins. And that's when they start to kind of like playing tricks on people and they'll say, what do you think's in the box? And then they open it up and it's something that it shouldn't be. So it helps them to understand that other people have their own ideas and feelings and also how to make sense of others' behaviors. So they understand a sense of intention and they understand that other people may be sad or happy. And they can also change their minds and revise their plans. So just because they're feeling a certain way at that moment doesn't mean that it has to stay that way. So, development of theory of mind. At age 2, they understand that people have wants and desires that are different from their own. At age 3, they understand that people have thoughts and beliefs different than their own. And by age 4, they understand the connection between mental states and behavior. So they're starting to understand different people's feelings. And most children achieve a full theory of mind by age 4 or 5. However, those who have older siblings and a more knowledgeable other may achieve it sooner because a lot of these things are based off of their experience and their practice with it. So we are going to stop and process what we have discussed so far. So language development during early childhood. So going back to these things, phonology, the study, the sounds of words; semantics, the meaning of words; syntax, the grammar rules that govern sentence structure; pragmatics, how we use language in social settings; and morphology, how we change words for plurals, tenses, prefix, suffixes, and things like that. So, functions of language. So, early functions satisfy needs, they direct the behaviors of others, they're used to describe oneself, they're used to facilitate social interactions, they're used for information gathering and sharing, play, imagination, and pretend. But as they get older, they have later functions. So, they use language to interpret and integrate experiences. They use it as an expression of cognitive process and social emotional processes, and they use it for organizing communication amongst themselves and others. So, here are some major milestones in language development in childhood. So, in early childhood, phonology, their pronunciations improve. They learn their letter sounds and they're able to articulate and sound out their words better. Semantics wise, their vocabulary expands and they start understanding of spatial relationships and the use of spatial words in speech. So they start adding things to their sentences to help it make more sense. Morphology and syntax, that's grammatically, they use grammatical morphemes for regular sequences. So they'll change their verb tenses, they'll add on or non to the beginning of words depending on their experiences. And they have awareness of most rules of transformational grammar. So they start understanding that a sentence starts with a capital and a period, and that when I say something, I can say it in a certain way. So I may say it louder if I'm excited, or I may ask it in a question format if it's a question. So pragmatics, they begin understanding of intent. Was the word sarcastic? Was it meant happy? What was it? And they understand some adjustments to speech to different audiences. So how they talk to mom is different than how they talk on the playground with their friends, and is different than how they talk to their teacher. And some attempts of clarifying ambiguous messages. So they try to explain themselves. And then metalinguistic awareness, they have some phonemic and grammatical awareness, but it's going to expand even more as they move into middle childhood, adolescence, and into adulthood. So conversational skills. All of the language functions are necessary for successful communication. And skills to be competent in conversating. You have to be sensitive and empathetic to the listener. You have to take turns. You have to use and respond to indirect requests. You have to have an awareness and understanding of relevance. Is what you're talking about, is there a point to it, or is it you're just talking to talk? You have to have an ability to make conversational repair. So if you said something incorrect, Make sure that you stop and think about it and try to explain it. And then pragmatic adjustments. If it's causing problems in the conversation, maybe you should put distractions away or focus more on the person who's talking. Lots of things that they're practicing. So the more children at this age talk and they turn and they share with their partners and they have times playing, the better they're going to be in regard to learning conversation skills. So language development, as we've talked about, explodes during this time. And it's because they're getting an influx of all these different things and all these different books and contexts and symbols. And on average, a 5-year-old knows about 2,072 words. However, this does depend on socioeconomic status, whether their parents are working, and all of this. It's based off of content and exposure. So if a child is read to and their parents talk to them, they're going to know more words. Whereas if the parent is busy and at work, or they watch TV and they don't really talk as much, their words are going to go down. So exposure and context is very, very, very important. And also just being able to read and letting them explore books. Some parents and some households don't have books. So a lot of schools are sending books home. A lot of programs are trying to implement reading into it to help them. So there's a lot of things that are happening, but reading a book and talking to a child is very, very important. So a little bit more about language development in regard to private speech. So private speech is when children talk even though no one is listening to them. And this typically occurs during solitary play. Now, Piaget and Vygotsky both have different views on private speech. Piaget says speech is egocentric. So it's the inability to see the viewpoint of others because they're talking to themselves. And he believed private speech was replaced by other means of self-expression as children develop. Now, with us, I want you to think about this for a minute. When you are quiet, what do you hear in your head? You should hear a little voice in your head, and it probably sounds a lot like you. So private speech is that little voice that's in your head. However, when you were little, that little voice wasn't necessarily in your head. It came out through your mouth as well. So Piaget says that it's replaced by other self-expressions. So instead of speaking out, a lot of us now revert it inside. So we internalize it. We have inner speech. Now, Vygotsky says that it's used for self-guidance and as a think aloud. Well, even when we're doing something today and it's difficult for us and we're like, where did I put my keys? Most of us say that out loud and not in our head. So private speech becomes unspoken a lot and becomes inner speech. However, we still use private speech. We just internalize it instead. But it's a way of helping us guide, whereas Piaget says it's just them talking about how they feel and their emotions. And when they're little, they do that. They're like, I'm going to use blue on this. But it's also their ability of problem solving and thinking and guiding their thoughts. And it's a very important skill as they get older, because thinking through a process and learning how to problem solve is a very big deal, and not just giving up. So persevering can come from this. So grammar. So grammar skills do increase at this age. And again, it's based on experience, exposure, and practice. And children will learn vicariously through others. So Bandura and Vygotsky here with more knowledgeable others and modeling. Now, basic elementary grammar rules are mastered. So they do learn that the subject precedes the verb. So the cat ran, not ran the cat. And they also learn that verbs have different tenses. So I go, my mom goes. They start to learn those different things. However, they do have trouble with irregulars. So they may say goes, they would spell it GOS instead of GOES. Or I I go, I went. They're not quite ready for those different changes, especially like wolf and wolves, box and box. Like they're not quite ready for all that. And a lot of their errors would be they just add an S to everything, or they add an S when it's not needed. And one of the most common ones is mine and mines for them. So prepositions are also difficult and may not be mastered at this age as well. So communicative disorders. So communicative disorders are any disorders that impairs one's ability to communicate. And these can range from mild to severe, and there's three common ones. There's voice disorders, which deal with the difficulties in the quality of the voice. There's fluency disorders, which causes a person to struggle communicating smoothly. So they may have a stutter, or they may not be able to articulate as much. And then articulation disorders causes a person to struggle to produce appropriate sounds. So they may, a certain sound, they would say it incorrectly. And causes of communicative disorders are due to anatomical abnormalities, brain injuries, and some of them are just unknown. So to see what these look like, there is a link here that I'm going to direct you to where you can hear each of these individually so that you can see what they sound like. And then here's also a link on how you could help in regard to speech interventions. And there's lots of them, but again, it all depends on the person's zone of proximal development and which disorder they have. So we are going to pause and process once again. Go back and review as needed to answer these questions. And that is the end of this section.